Alright everyone, another example of it's time to get serious about something. The number of Ebola cases has now tripled. And the World Health Organization's not mincing words anymore. They came out and said, well, this is pretty much the new normal. The new normal in Central Africa and possibly West Africa is going to be big Ebola outbreaks. It's not going to be 3 people in a village died and the village was 7 people, so that's pretty much it. It's not going to be a couple dozen cases in some, pygmy village out in the middle of the northern Congo. It's going to be thousands or more dying. The problem is that because Ebola has shown readiness to mutate, that's a ticking time bomb, and as I've explained for a number of years now, it should be taken much more seriously. They're warning now, Doctors Without Borders and some of these groups. They need more resources, and they're not getting them. The problem is that in the West Africa Ebola outbreak, because it was novel, the idea of the first really big outbreak since, I think, the late 70s when a few thousand people died, ironically, in the Congo, similar to this outbreak in size, although nowhere near as fast spreading. Since then, there hadn't been as many larger outbreaks as, a few hundred people at most, mostly a few dozen, essentially, if you look at sort of the timeline of Ebola. Because that part of Africa was so underdeveloped, if there was an outbreak in some rural village, you might never hear about it anyway. It just wiped the village out and it would stop existing, essentially. Someone ate bushmeat, a couple dozen people die, and that's basically it. But now, some of these places are hooked up to the world at large. Travel is increasing. Population density is definitely increasing, especially in West and Central Africa. All over this area, there are more and more people. There are still few medical resources. The medical resources that are there, they can deal with you've got a common cold. They can deal with you sprained your ankle. They have no problem. You got headaches or something. Okay, you're fine. The problem is that the apparatus for more advanced disease research, for treating something catastrophic like Ebola, it doesn't exist. There is nowhere that you can go in Central Africa to get Ebola treatment unless it's being administered by foreign groups. Don't we realize that with the population density of that part of the world skyrocketing at massive levels, that's going to be a problem? World trade has begun to seep into some of the ports and airports within Central Africa and within West Africa. Like Nigeria is beginning to rapidly develop. It's becoming rapidly an urban culture. It's becoming, sort of the place to be if you're in the African continent, other than maybe Egypt or South Africa, which is maybe not a happy statement at some times, but it's developing. Population density is rapidly increasing. What happens if Ebola gets to Lagos should be the question that we're asking ourselves. Nobody wants to ask the fucking question. Nobody takes it seriously. Most of the world shuts its eyes and doesn't even know there's an epidemic there. I think part of it is all the Gen Xers that grew up reading about, the fucking National Geographic. Oh, Ebola, Marburg and stuff. Oh, yeah, interesting. Tropical diseases. They stay in the tropics. It can't come here because those people don't have planes, essentially. That's not the way it works anymore. Butembo does have hookups to I can't remember the name of that particular city that's, Butembo's the size of Boston. They've got Ebola. It's not that far away from a city that's even larger, has 1 million people in it, has an international airport. That's a fucking problem. Nobody will fucking address it. Doctors Without Borders can't do anything. They don't have the resources. They deploy hundreds of thousands of vaccines in and around this affected area. Has it slowed down the rate of transmission? It doesn't seem to have. Well, the problem is that if you're vaccinating some pockets of people trying to keep it down, you're just buying time while it mutates anyway, probably. If the epidemic gets snuffed out, at this point, with this many people, in a civil war zone especially, in a zone where there's already a lot of chaos, Ebola wards get attacked and stuff, you've got a terrible situation there anyway. If the Ebola epidemic there dies down, I will expect that it'll be because of, like with the West Africa epidemic years ago, there was a mutation that created an asymptomatic variety that spreads out and begins inoculating people so they're not getting an Ebola infection that actually has symptoms. Or maybe one that's a lot weaker. Maybe it's only like the common cold. It mutates that way. It's possible. Thankfully, it's as likely to do that as it is to mutate in the other direction, become more deadly, more transmissible or something. But it can do that too. And we're just sort of sitting back and letting the whole area be a science experiment at the moment. And that's actually rather frightening because, again, in the former epidemic, many cases as though they were, most of them were rural cases. They reached the outskirts of, I think, Freetown, if I remember correctly. But for the most part, small town Africa basically being affected. And of course, a lot of those cases you never heard about. It never hit a major metropolitan hub that has world trade and travel. Right now, there's a blossoming Ebola epidemic right next to one. And there have already been at least a few sporadic cases in the area that has this world trade. Nobody's taking it seriously. So a disease that kills between 30 and 50% of everyone who gets it and leaves the survivors scarred for fucking life, sometimes infertile. Sometimes they can transmit Ebola for up to 6 months through semen, through sex, even long after they're no longer symptomatic of anything. They can cause vascular issues. It can cause mental degeneration. It can cause all sorts of muscular fucking problems. It's sort of like the Black Death. I'm thinking, man, maybe this was the actual Black Death. Maybe Ebola managed to crawl its way over to China somehow. Maybe a piece of salted chimpanzee meat was presented to the king and all of a sudden people started dying. Who fucking knows? Whatever the case may be, it's looking a little bit like the Red Death too. By the way, definitely read Mask of the Red Death. Very interesting short work. You should definitely read it. I remember, I think there's a song about that. Well, there's the Blood Waltz, obviously. You listen to the Blood Waltz by Kristen Lawrence, too. And we are getting close to Halloween time, you know. In Vermont terms, yeah, autumn's right around the corner. Sorry if I sound a little bit sad about that. It's like, hey, maybe I should be in the Everglades right now. Maybe I should be South Padre Islands along beaches. Maybe I should be in the Amazon, in all honesty. Maybe it'd be safer in the Amazon. There's no Ebola there and there's no world trade there either. But, you know, it's not really a funny story. They're not... What are they doing to prevent this from going pandemic mode outside of Africa? It's not the disease you're dealing with now. It's the disease you could be dealing with tomorrow because mutation is a thing. Again, never see this discussed. World governments don't want to touch it. They yawn and they go back to their cigars, essentially. That's about all. Peace out.